All right, sit tight, because you're not going to believe what I've got to tell you. I'm the guy you probably never think about, the Undertaker. Yeah, that's right. The last person to tuck you in before your eternal nap. Sounds gloomy, doesn't it? But hey, it's a job, and someone's got to do it. Now, I've seen a lot of strange things in my line of work, but nothing, absolutely nothing compares to what started happening about a year ago. I'm talking about hearing the dead. Crazy, right? Just hold on. It gets weirder. It all kicked off on what I thought was an ordinary Tuesday. There I was, in the morgue, prepping Mrs. Henderson for her final journey. Lovely old lady by all accounts. Never had the pleasure while she was breathing, but in death, she seemed peaceful, almost regal, laid out on the slab. I was doing my usual thing, making sure she looked her best for the big send-off, when out of the freaking blue I thought I had more time. I whipped around so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash, but there was no one there. Just me and Mrs. Henderson, and she was as dead as they come. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Too many late nights, too much caffeine, or maybe just the eerie silence of the morgue getting to me. But then, as clear as day, Mrs. Henderson's voice came again. It was lung cancer. I died in a hospital surrounded by my family. It was nice. Now, you tell me, how in the hell does a dead person decide to strike up a conversation about their exit from the world? I was spooked, to say the least. Checked the room for hidden speakers, even pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Nothing. Nada. Just me and the whispering dead. You'd think that'd be enough to send anyone running for the hills, right? But here's the thing. I'm good at my job. More than good, actually. I've got a knack for it. Always have. Where some people see morbid and grim, I see respect and care. A chance to help someone's last image be their best. So, I shook it off, chalked it up to stress, or a freaky one-off, and went back to work. But Mrs. Henderson was just the beginning. Before long, every body that came through my doors had a story to tell. It was like they knew I could hear them, and they were all lined up to share their final moments. A heart attack here, a car wreck there. Snippets of lives ended suddenly, whispered in the still air of the morgue. I gotta admit, it shook me. Not enough to quit my job or anything. I told you, I'm not the type to run. But enough to make me start wondering, what was going on? Was I losing my grip? Or was there something else, something beyond understanding, happening in my funeral home? As the days turned into weeks, the whispers became a part of my routine. I listened, nodded where it seemed appropriate, and carried on with my work. It was bizarre, sure, but in a twisted way, it felt like I was doing something important. Giving these souls a final nod before they moved on. That's what I thought, at least, until the messages started changing, until they started talking about presence. And that's when I realized this wasn't just some strange fluke. Something much bigger, much darker, was at play. So there I was, deep into this new bizarre part of my job, right? Every day was like opening a book to a random page, never knowing the story I'd get. Heartfelt goodbyes, unresolved issues, sudden endings, you name it, I heard it. And let me tell you, it was a trip. Imagine going to work every day not just to deal with the dead, but to actually hear them spill their guts, literally and figuratively. Sounds like a plot straight out of a horror flick, doesn't it? But this was my life now. No popcorn needed. At first, it was overwhelming. Each whisper, each hushed confession or revelation felt like a punch to the gut. I mean, there I was, trying to make the deceased look their best, and they're telling me about their last moments on Earth. Mrs. Thompson talked about her last day at the beach, the sun on her face, the sand between her toes, and then, bam, a heart attack out of nowhere. Mr. Rodriguez, a young guy, too young, told me about the drunk driver who took his life. Each story was a reminder of how fragile life is, how it can all end in the blink of an eye. But humans, we're adaptable creatures, aren't we? After a while, these voices, these stories, became just another part of the job. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't cold or indifferent. If anything, I felt honored they chose to share with me, like I was the keeper of their final confessions. I'd listen, nod, sometimes even talk back, though I never got a reply. I guess once they said their piece, that was it. They were done. The funeral home was busier than ever. Being the only gig in a small town means you're never short on clients. And with each new client, there came a new story. I heard tales of love, loss, regret, and sometimes even the dark stuff you wish you could unhear. Like Mr. Baker, who whispered his guilt over a fight with his son, a fight they never got to resolve. Or Miss Daniels, who regretted spending her last years in anger, pushing everyone away. It was heavy, man, real heavy. But amidst all the sorrow, there were moments of peace, even beauty. Like the old poet Mr. Lee, who recited his final unpublished poem to me. It was about accepting death, seeing it not as an end, but a beginning. His words stuck with me, became a sort of mantra on the tough days. And there were plenty of those. You see, dealing with the dead is one thing, but hearing them, carrying their last words around with you, that's a whole other level of responsibility. It makes you think, makes you ponder your own mortality. I found myself looking at my life, wondering what I'd say in my final moments. It was introspective, sure, but also kinda isolating. I mean, who could I talk to about this? Hey buddy, passed any good spirits lately? Yeah, that'd go over well. So I kept it to myself, this strange secret communion with the dead. It was lonely, sure, but also fulfilling in a way I can't fully explain. That is, until things took a turn for the weird. Even weirder than just chatting with the dearly departed, if you can believe it. Because soon, the dead started talking about something else, something that made all the previous conversations seem like small talk. They started talking about presents, and not the kind you unwrap with joy. All right, buckle up, because this is where things start to get real weird. I thought I had seen it all, you know? After months of hearing the last words and thoughts of those who had passed on, I figured nothing could shake me anymore. But oh boy, was I wrong. Dead wrong, you might say. Enter Mr. Jenkins, an old-timer with a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of hard times and soft smiles. His family said he died of natural causes, alone in that big old house he called home for the last 50 years. Natural causes, my foot. When his body came in, I did my usual routine, cleaning him up, making him presentable for the funeral. That's when he started talking, and man, his story gave me the chills like nothing before. I lived alone in an old family house, he began, voice as clear as a bell in the quiet of the morgue. I paused, scalpel in hand, waiting for him to continue. My children had moved out decades ago, and my wife, she passed last year. His voice had this melancholy tone, filled with a lifetime of memories. I nodded, out of respect more than anything, and urged him to go on, not with words, but with my silence. It was peaceful at first after she left. Lonely, but peaceful, he whispered, his voice growing fainter, like a radio tuning in and out. But then, it started. At night, I'd hear noises, strange sounds from the attic, the walls. Thought it was just the house settling, you know, old bones creaking. I'm not gonna lie, at this point I was hooked. Every corpse had its story, sure, but this felt different, more urgent somehow. Mr. Jenkins' voice grew stronger, more panicked. One night, it showed itself. A shadow darker than the darkest night, with eyes that burned like coals. It told me I was going to be a present. A shiver ran down my spine. A present, he repeated, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Now I'm not easily spooked. I work with the dead, for crying out loud. But this was something else. Something not right. Mr. Jenkins' body was found at the bottom of his house's staircase. The official report said he tripped, an accident. But hearing him tell it, well, it didn't sound like any accident. It sounded like something out of a horror movie. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked his daughter about the house, about anything unusual. Tried to make it sound casual, like I was just making conversation. But she looked at me like I had grown a second head. Said the house was old, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. Except, she mentioned, her dad had been acting strange the last few weeks, talking to himself, restless nights. She thought it was just grief, missing her mom. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to delve deeper, play detective, but another part, the sane part, wanted nothing to do with it. I chalked it up to an old man's imagination, the loneliness playing tricks on him. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. That present bit? It nagged at me, like a puzzle missing a crucial piece. The next few days were uneventful, the dead keeping to their usual script of regrets and final thoughts. I almost convinced myself that Mr. Jenkins' story was just an outlier, a fluke. But then came the young woman, and everything changed. Man, just when I thought I'd gotten a handle on this whole talking dead gig, the universe decided to throw me a curveball that had me questioning not just my sanity, but everything I thought I knew about life and death. And let me tell you, nothing prepares you for the moment when the dead start bringing personal messages to the party. Especially messages that make your blood run cold. So there I was, business as usual, prepping a young woman for her final goodbye. She was in her early 30s, way too young to be lying on my table. It's always tougher with the young ones, you know. Feels like a life barely begun. I was measuring her for the coffin, trying not to think too much about it, when she started talking. My family has a long history of heart problems, she said, her voice cutting through the silence of the room like a knife. I was 32. The heart attack was so sudden. Her voice trailed off, sadness woven through her words. It's one thing to hear the elderly recount their passing. It's a whole other ballgame when someone so young does it. There was a heaviness in my chest, a mix of sympathy and that all too familiar reminder of our own mortality. But then, just as I was about to offer my silent condolences, the air in the room shifted. It felt heavier, charged with an energy I can't quite explain. Its face scared me to death. Now I'm a present. You're present. I froze, scalpel in hand, the words echoing in my mind. You're present. The same phrase Mr. Jenkins had used. Coincidence? I wish. In that moment, every rational explanation I had clung to about these voices slipped away. This was something else, something much darker. I couldn't shake the image she planted in my brain. What face? Whose face? And why the hell was I somehow involved in this twisted narrative? My mind raced, panic setting in. The room felt smaller, the shadows in the corners darker, as if something was watching, waiting. I did what any sane person would do. I got the hell out of there. Called it a day and left the funeral home faster than I thought possible. The drive home was a blur. My hands shook so much I could barely keep the car on the road. Once home, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and poured myself a drink, then another, trying to drown out the fear with alcohol. It didn't work. You're present. The words haunted me, looping in my mind like a broken record. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every creak of my apartment, every shadow seemed sinister. I was on edge, jumping at the smallest noise, expecting, I don't even know what, a face. The shadowy figure Mr. Jenkins had described. The days that followed were a haze of anxiety and dread. I went through the motions at work, my mind never fully present. The dead continued to speak, but their stories faded into the background, overshadowed by the fear gnawing at me. What did it all mean? And why me? I kept thinking back to those two, Mr. Jenkins and the young woman, trying to find a connection, a reason behind their messages. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Then came the silence, a break in the voices, as if they too were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. And trust me, in my line of work, silence is the last thing you want. It's in the silence that fear grows, feeding on your thoughts, your paranoia. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, just when I was about to reach out to someone, anyone for help, the dead spoke again. But this time, it was different. This time, it was a message meant just for me, and it changed everything. All right, if you've stuck with me this far, you're either just as nuts as I feel or you've got a thing for twisted tales. Either way, buckle up, 'cause this last bit, man, it's something else. After that day, the voices went quiet, eerily quiet. You'd think that'd be a relief, right? After all the creepy messages and the whole Youre Present debacle, a bit of silence should have been welcome. But nah, it was like the calm before the storm. That tense, thick air right before lightning strikes. It had me on edge, waiting, wondering what was next. 'Cause deep down, I knew it wasn't over. This was the silence that screams, you know what I mean? I tried to go about my days like normal. Tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. A product of too much work, not enough sleep, and maybe one too many horror movies before bed. But who was I kidding? The unease settled in my bones, a constant companion that whispered doubts and fears into my ear. And then it happened. I was prepping a middle-aged man for cremation. Just another Tuesday. Seems like Tuesdays are cursed or something. His cause of death was one of those sad but not uncommon heart attacks. Routine job until it wasn't. As I'm working, lost in my thoughts, trying not to listen to the silence, he whispers, "It wants to know why you don't open your presents." My heart stopped. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. It. Again. That ominous, faceless presence lurking in the background of these messages. I stood there frozen, scalpel in hand, staring at the body as if expecting it to sit up and explain itself. But there was nothing. Just silence and the weight of those words. It felt like a threat, like I was being watched, judged. What did it want from me? What were these presents? Questions swirled in my mind, but answers. Yeah, those were in short supply. That was the last straw. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the anxiety, the constant feeling of being on the edge of a precipice. It was too much. I left the funeral home early, claimed I was sick, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't lying about it. I felt sick, down to my very soul. I decided to take some extended sick leave, something I'd never done before. The funeral home could manage without me, or so I hoped. I needed time, space, something to clear my head and find a semblance of peace. But as I packed up some essentials and left my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, of eyes on my back. Paranoia had become my new best friend, it seemed. So here I am, sharing my story with strangers on the internet, because who else can I tell? My family? Friends? They'd either think I've cracked under the pressure or, worse, they'd believe me, and then what? No, this was something I had to shoulder alone. But if by some chance you've experienced anything like this, or you know someone who has, please reach out. Maybe together we can figure out what's going on. Maybe we can find a way to fight back, to protect ourselves from whatever it is. Or maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to open these presents without losing ourselves in the process. For now, I'm laying low, keeping to myself, and trying to piece together the puzzle with the few pieces I have. But one thing's for certain, I can't hide forever. Sooner or later, I'll have to face whatever's coming. And when I do, I'll be ready. Or at least that's what I keep telling myself. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could be true.